now.
Okay, all right, well, I'll just share my screen again. Yes, here we go. I need to go back to that presentation. Okay, how's that? Can you see that? Oh, well, I assume you can see it since I haven't had any response there. All right, so...
Yes, you can see it.
Yes, you can see it. Okay, thanks, Maria. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about linguistic signals of discourse, topicality, and Buwal and Gavar expository texts. So there's a picture of the village of Gadala where the Buwal people live and where we lived for a number of years in the past, beautiful part of the world. So this study is actually part of a collaborative publication project that I'm doing with a number of linguists around the world, looking at topic in discourse. So a bit of background language on the languages, bit background information, sorry, on the languages in question. So they're two closely related Central Chadic languages spoken by maybe around 10,000 and 15,000 people respectively. It's hard to get accurate figures on population numbers. And their homelands are adjacent to each other and located in the far north of Cameroon. And that's just a language map there showing Buwal and Gavar there sort of around the middle and some other related languages nearby. So they're classified according to the ethnologue as Afro-Asiatic, Chadic Biomandara, A and A7, in Gravina's updated classification. He has Chadic, Central, South, Darba, and Buwal. So the Buwal group has Buwal and Gavar in it. So these are actually two very closely related languages. And there's actually been some discussion about whether they're one language or actually distinct varieties. And I guess we can always have those kinds of discussions because they do have high lexico-statistical similarity and mutual intelligibility. But as further studies have been done, there are some differences in their lexicon, phonology and grammar that perhaps could indicate that these are distinct varieties, but I guess that's up for debate. But very similar in a lot of ways. So they have very similar morphosyntactic characteristics, unmarked word or constituent order as SVO, and subject predicate in verbless or stative kind of clauses. Gavar tends to have a bit more variation in word order due to pragmatic factors, which I haven't quite got to the bottom of yet. Complex verb morphology, tense aspect marking, subject, direct object, indirect object, pronominal or agreement marking, directional marking, and other derivational morphology on verbs. So verbs are quite complex, whereas nominal morphology is much more simple. It tends to be limited. The basic plural marker actually being a particle that occurs later in the noun phrase. It doesn't even attach to the noun. Phrase structure is pretty strongly head initial. And as Stephen mentioned, we have clause final question words. And also negation as well. So that's an interesting feature of these languages. Okay, so we come to our topic for today, which is discourse topics. So topic is one of those terms in linguistics that can be defined in a number of different ways and is actually quite confusing. We often, when we talk about topic, we're often talking about sentence topic, which perhaps could be loosely defined as what a sentence is about. So a discourse topic then is what a discourse is about. And the scope of a discourse topic is the discourse unit. So we're looking at units that are above the sentence level. So we could say that a discourse can have a number of different types of themes or topics. Theme is another word in linguistics. It can have a number of different definitions. But in our context, we're talking about theme, topic is kind of what the text is about. So a discourse can have a number of different types of topics which underpin the coherence and cohesion of a text. So these could be situations, goals, propositions, reference, all kinds of different ways that we could answer the question, what is this text about, for example. So for this study, we're actually looking at reference. So we're defining discourse topic as a referential theme. So anything that can be encoded with a noun phrase. So that can be a person, object, event, place, process, generic class, or situation. So all sorts of different things that can be encoded with a noun phrase. So as I said, this is part of a collaborative project, and Brendan Yoder, who is in charge of this project, is writing an introductory chapter, and this is how his working definition of topic. This may change in the final version. So he says, topic is what speakers are talking about in discourse. Topics are those entities and states of affairs on which speakers and hearers focus their attention, to which they jointly attend in interaction and around which they centre their talk. So there's a number of different ways to look at topic, you know, the cognitive point of view, the communications point of view, and he's tried to incorporate these different points of view in his definition. So one thing we need to understand about texts is that they have a hierarchical structure. So this is where we see different kinds of discourse units. You can have a micro level, which is one or more sentences, paragraphs, episodes, or I'll be talking about sections since I'm talking about expository text, not narrative, and of course the complete text. And each level can have its own discourse topic. So Chafe actually makes a distinction between what is called super topics, which are higher level topics, say at the complete textual level, or the section level, and then basic level topics, which are more kind of at the paragraph or micro level. So we want to make this distinction because sometimes high level topics are treated differently than basic level topics. So a high level super topic might be if you had in an encyclopedia a section, you know, on the England, for example. So England could be a super topic, but then you might actually find that England is actually not mentioned very much throughout the text. So super topics can be mentioned at the beginning and then may not actually be referred to very much throughout the text, whereas basic level topics tend to be more continuous and be referred to a bit more continually throughout a discourse unit. So that's kind of the difference, but again, there's kind of overlaps. Super topics can be used at a more basic level as well. So it does get a little bit complicated. So the aim of this study is to identify and describe the linguistic signals used to introduce, maintain and close discourse topics in Buwal and Gavar expository texts. So the idea is to really go from function to form rather than form to function. So we first identify topics conceptually and then look at the formal linguistic devices that are used to set them apart as a particular interest or importance. So a speaker will use particular devices to draw the attention of the hearer to a particular referent, signalling that this is of particular interest or importance. And we need to know that some of these linguistic devices that I will talk about actually have other functions as well. So I will try and mention some of those functions as we go through. So firstly, I just wanted to give a quick overview of the texts that I looked at. I looked at 4 texts from Buwal and 4 from Gavar, all of different kinds. In both Buwal and Gavar, there's a text about how to find a wife. In that particular area. There's Labar, making sacrifices to a place, is about making sacrifices to appease the spirit of a place so that you might have offended. Buwal festivals, as you can imagine, is about just a description of different festivals in Buwal, the Buwal land. Traditional remedies, all about different kinds of traditional remedies and the diseases that they treat. The story of cholera describes a cholera epidemic that took place in the Gavar area in 2010 and the measures that were taken to try and combat the disease. Advantages of living in the bush, as you can imagine, it basically lists the advantages of living in the bush rather than in town. And the story of caterpillars is about the problem of caterpillars coming and eating crops and what is done to combat that. So just I would mention about the nature of these texts. I have classified them as basically expository, but we often get a kind of blending of different genres of text. So there might be kind of a bit of narrative or procedural kind of genre blended in, especially in some texts like La, making sacrifices to a place. The action centers around a hypothetical woman who has offended a spirit and needs to appease it. And so in some of these texts, yeah, you have kind of these hypothetical or generic kind of people that groups of people around which the action centers. So in that way, it kind of tends to be a little bit like a narrative or a procedural kind of text. So that's something to keep in mind as we look through the examples. Okay, and I would also say that some of these texts have a kind of partitive schema, so this will come up in some of the examples we will look at later. So when you have a partitive schema, you have low-level topics being subcategories of higher-level topics. So like in the text Menjivit Manonantige, where it's talking about different traditional remedies, the super topic is traditional remedies, but then you have all these lower-level topics which center in on particular remedies. So that's an example of a partitive schema. So I mentioned the word schema. It's an outline for the conceptual structure of a discourse unit. And mostly texts have an introduction, main body, and conclusion. So what I did was construct a schema for each text showing the different discourse units and how they fit into the hierarchical structure. And then I tried to identify topics for the different levels. So basically assuming that there is one topic for one unit, discourse unit. So I've given you an example. I won't show you the schemas for all the texts, but this is to give you an idea of what I did. So the text Labar gwagurnah about the caterpillars is a fairly short one. So we've got a clear introduction, main body, and conclusion, and super topic being the caterpillars, and then your lower level topics. We've got the people of the bush. In paragraph 3 there, we have the rain. And yeah, mostly the basic level topic tends to be this the people of the bush. And so what we are doing to combat these caterpillars. Okay, so introduction of topics. We see quite a lot of different linguistic devices that are used to introduce topics. And so this is a table, and we can kind of identify sort of primary devices, which are in purple there, which are devices that directly refer to the topic, say with a noun phrase. But the secondary devices below can kind of devices that can co-occur with these primary ones and may have other functions as well as kind of marking topic. So we'll see some examples of that as we go along. Okay, so firstly, we have the presentative construction. So this introduces a new unidentifiable topic, involves the existential particle aka, which is the same in both languages, and it often includes an indefinite determiner, which means a certain or another. And if a topic is introduced in this way, it goes on to be used as a basic level topic, even though it may also be a super topic, as in the case of the caterpillars. So this was an example. So I'll just try and play that for you. Okay, so this tends to cut off the end of the recording. But anyway, you heard the first part, which is where the topic is. So there's a certain woman. So this was the text from about making sacrifices to appease the spirit of a place. And so we've got this hypothetical woman being introduced, that she is going with a blacksmith to make sacrifices. Okay, so we also have another very common device is the preposed definite noun phrase. So in this case, it's used for identifiable topics. It involves the preposing of the referring NP, and it's usually accompanied by a rising intonation and followed by a pause. So let's see from the caterpillars. Okay, so we, the people of the bush, our work is cultivation. So I'll just play that again. You can listen for the hear the rising intonation and the pause. So I wanted to mention here that this preposed noun phrases often follow what is called in Chadic linguistics a topic marker. Now, in this case, topic in this case is actually a different kind of topic defined differently from the discourse topics we're talking about. Topic markers in Chadic languages basically mark frame setting constructions, or you might call them points of departure, which contain background information in a sentence. And Buwal has 4 different types of topic markers, each with a slightly different function, but I'm not going to go into all of that today. But here's an example of a preposed noun phrase with a topic marker. Okay, and then yeah, cut the end off, but you heard the yellow part there. So another device that we see is the use of the indefinite determiner. We saw that already with the presentative constructions, but it can also be preposed as well. So it can be used pronominally, so on its own, or as a noun modifier. So each language has different singular and plural forms. So we've got Wende Mende for singular in Buwal, and Vidye for plural. Gawa, we've got Minja for singular and Ndibagi for plural. Agi is your plural marker in Gawa. So we often see this in text with a partitive schema, referring, as I said, referring to a subgroup of a broader topical category. Here's an example from the Gabar text about courting a wife. Okay, so he was talking quite fast. There wasn't actually a pause there. Here we see the indefinite determiner on its own. Another one, in this case, referring to a girl. You don't go to her father's home. Basically, in Gabar land, the most common way of getting a wife is elopement and going and courting in secret. Okay, so you might also have an explicit title given, as in that same text about courting a wife. So here the speaker actually gives a title, Courting of Women. And these examples come from the text about different Buwal festivals. Okay, I'll display that. So basically she's giving the name of the festival at the start of the section. Yeah. Okay, again, that recording cut off, but here here she actually corrects herself. She starts to talk about the festival of Damara, and then she realizes, oh no, that festival comes later. She's going through them in chronological order. So she corrects herself here and says, Deccan. I'll just point out in these examples too, we have an example of this connector, yo, which often occurs in Buwal texts marking the beginning of a section. So we sometimes find that with topics. And in 6b here, we've got this interjection as well. So occasionally you'll find interjections co-occurring with topics as well. Perhaps the interjection here is more kind of meaning, oh, I have to correct myself, but rather than new topic. Okay, so as I've mentioned, certain connectors can be found in conjunction with new topics, and some of these can have other functions. So like we saw, yo can be used to introduce a new section. There's also the sequential marker aya, and I've done a study of narrative texts in Buwal and found that it's used to mark significant developments. So again, you can find this co-occurring with a new topic. Okay, so it's again with this topic marker, and then Bayam, so the chief of the blacksmiths. Other connectors, we have the contrastive conjunction ama, which is borrowed from the full day actually, which is the trade language of the area, can be used in both languages. Okay, so but a certain caterpillar, so then the caterpillar is introduced. And you also have expressions like firstly, secondly, as new points of being, the description develops, I guess, introducing new points in the description. Okay, so again, we've got this yo here, and then we've got mabakanta, which means secondly, and then chenbo imanbo, which is the father of the boy and the mother of the boy, so the boy's parents. So that's actually a topic of this section. One example was found in a Buwal text of a pseudo-cleft construction. So let's play that. Okay, again, that cut off at the end there, but so we didn't actually hear the pseudo-cleft construction. Mazai makadzo. So it's the Mazai who celebrate it, or this festival. So here the Mazai are the chief, either the chief or the chiefly clan amongst the Buwal. So they're the primary people that celebrate these festivals. And so it's this is the first time they're mentioned here, and then it goes on to talk about what the Mazai do. We also see an example here of repetition. So here, Welmbegem is actually the section topic. It's the name of the festival. And we've got this repetition here of people celebrate Welmbegem, people celebrate Welmbegem. So drawing attention to that super, like a super, or that as super topic. So I mentioned seeing the repetition in that last example. This is another example of repetition of a topic. It keeps on not playing the whole thing. Okay, so basically he repeats this while a young man. Actually, it's almost a bit like he's tripping over his words there. So whether it's probably not a deliberate repetition, but it's still kind of drawing attention to that topic. And in that example too, we see this expression "hogretsa," which means you see, and we sometimes see topics being the complement of this ogre, you see that such and such. It doesn't only occur at the beginning of a paragraph, that kind of thing. So perhaps it's a bit like in English where we say, you know, for example, this, for example, that, perhaps marking a kind of development. So again, sort of it's correlating with the topic, but may not be specifically a topic marker as such. And I talked about interjections. So occasionally we see topical entities are introduced without any formal introduction, and which is how non-topical reference are introduced. So how do we know it's a topic or not? Well, I guess it's a bit debatable. And of course, when this occurs, the topic is usually identifiable, and it's only used with basic level topics, which last a short time. So perhaps it's less topical. We could perhaps argue that topic is kind of a continuum. So some reference being more topical and others less. So perhaps these ones that are introduced with that informally are less topical. So this is an example from the Caterpillar's text. So here we have the rain just acting without any formal introduction. And we see that this is a fairly brief topic, just applies to a few sentences, so quite a short paragraph. And of course, that it is well known, you know, from our knowledge of how the world works, perhaps doesn't really need a formal introduction. Okay, so what about ongoing reference to topics? We see that there's quite a distinction between topics and non-topics in the introduction. Ongoing reference is a bit more tricky because reference encoding is actually strongly determined by continuity and discontinuity. So continuity is continuity of reference. When have you last mentioned this entity? Discontinuity is when there's a break in the mentions of this entity. So most of the time in situations of discontinuity, you'll find more reference encoding, so a noun phrase or something like that. In situations of continuity, you'll find minimal encoding, so zero anaphora or bound pronouns, that kind of thing. And we know that this driving force, I suppose, of continuity, function of discontinuity and continuity affects topics and non-topics. So when we're looking at topicality, we need to try and determine how referent encoding is influenced by this secondary function of topicality as opposed to just continuity. And we know there's a high correlation between topicality and continuity as well. So these things are actually connected. So to try and tease these two functions apart, it's a little tricky. But I have tried, and this is a table of the different topical functions for the different linguistic devices or referent encoding in situations of both continuity and discontinuity. So I'll just go through a few examples. So in situations of continuity, as I said, you usually have minimal encoding, zero anaphora, bound or unstressed pronouns. But we can also see that as a signal of topicality where minimal encoding is used, where you would normally expect a noun phrase. So as I said, if there's a break in reference, if there's a discontinuity, you would normally expect a noun phrase. But occasionally with topics, you'll find minimal encoding anyway. And this in narrative text, that's what we call the VIP strategy. So an example of this is from the Buwal text about finding a wife. So in this section, the parents go and find a girl and pay bride price for her, even when she's still a baby or a child. And so in 13b, it talks about the girl growing up. And then that's 13a, sorry, in 13b, when she's grown up, the parents bring her to their son. But we see here in 13b that the parents, we don't have a noun phrase saying the parents. We have these the person plural subject pronoun attached to the verb, even though the parents have not been mentioned in the previous sentence. So normally in a situation like that, you would expect to see a noun phrase in 13b, but we just have this pronominal form. So that is because the parents are the topic of this paragraph, and so it's predictable. We know who is being talked about here. In text with a partitive structure, we kind of see a supertopic can be maintained with zero encoding. So as in the text on different remedies, we say wende malamathatha. Another, we don't have to keep repeating menjavek, so remedy. Another one or another is for arthritis. In B, malamas boch aka. For bone ache, there is. We don't keep repeating remedy, remedy. We kind of know what we're talking about. Also in situations of continuity, we sometimes see an independent pronoun in the focus position in a cleft construction. I've got a recording for this one. Okay, that played the whole one that time. Okay, so they are the ones who come to take that body to bury it. Talking about the government agents that came to combat the cholera disease. So that kind of construction is used to express contrastive or narrow focus. In situations of discontinuity, we see again the preposed definite noun phrase like we saw in the introduction. And we saw in the introduction to a topic that is used for identifiable topics. And so again, we can see that throughout a text, it may be used for identifiable topics because perhaps it's been mentioned before. So you can have a previously non-topical referent being upgraded to topical status, or a topic being reintroduced, or used for a contrastive topic, so contrasting with another topic. So just one example of that comes from the beginning of a paragraph. So this girl or woman was actually the topic of the previous paragraph, but we see at the beginning of the paragraph she is reintroduced as the topic. Okay, so then that girl, and then so on and so forth. She does such and such. Also, at the end of a paragraph, you often find like a non-preposed noun phrase, even when it's been mentioned in the previous sentence. And I was thinking, is this indicating the end of a topic? But actually looking at the examples, we see that sometimes that topic can continue to be the topic in the next paragraph, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes there's a shift. So it's not really marking the end of a topic, but just marking a discontinuity that's the end of a section. So this is an example. I don't have a recording for that. Again, talking about these government agents that came to combat cholera. We have them mentioned in 17a with a noun phrase and in 17b with a noun phrase, which is the end of that little paragraph about the government agents. I wanted to mention something about the distal demonstrative. Perhaps I could get some feedback from you about this. It is used as a previous reference marker in these languages, so Weshi and Buwal and Gavar. So if a referent has been mentioned previously, then it will we will have this demonstrative, and it usually marks noun phrases discontinuities, and also is used to distinguish a referent from others in the vicinity. So, so one of its functions is to mark discontinuities. It also seems to have a highlighting function to highlight particular reference or parts of a discourse. And as with this function, it can actually be used with both topical and non-topical entities. So perhaps it isn't really a mark of topicality, but I thought this example was interesting from the text on cholera in the introductory section, where it explains the problem of cholera and the effects that it has. We actually see that it is mentioned with the noun phrase with that distal demonstrative 4 times. So 4 sentences in a row, which is pretty unusual. So there, I think it's really highlighting this significant problem that the disease was causing. And that's why it's being used in this way. An example with a non-topical entity comes from this text about making sacrifices, again, to a place, or to the spirit of a place. The woman's child may be sick, and so she goes and in this case pours out a libation at the place, and then she returns home. So the topic here is actually this woman, but she comes home, she to her child, and then she calls that child of hers, and then she smears the kind of libation, I guess you could say, on her child. So we've got that child of hers repeated a number of times, but the child there is not really the topic. So here it's kind of highlighting, I suppose you say, a climax of that kind of mini narrative. I'd also mentioned that in Gavar, and this was only found in Gavar and not in Buwal, it was this particular preposition, uzaha, down can mean something like concerning with a topic. So, jana uzahata dau watsa. So again, concerning that disease. It was used with a reintroduced topic, just in that one text. Okay, so just to talk briefly about the ending of topics, and topics tend to be not closed in a formal way, except in 2 specific situations. So at the basic level, a topic may be further clarified about its nature or identity, and in that case, a preposed noun phrase is used. So there was a couple of examples in Buwal texts. Okay, so like the remedies that they squeeze, it's like this. So that kind of ends that section or that unit about those particular kinds of remedies. So it's kind of clarifying the nature of those remedies. But in Gavar, it's quite interesting. They have this kind of formulaic expression used to close a complete text. So we're talking about super topics here now. And it's interesting that Gavar does this and Buwal doesn't. So this expression uses the focus copula ana, where the focus precedes the copula and the presupposition follows it. So in these expressions, the focus is a kind of a demonstrative or pronoun that refers back to the whole of the preceding text. And what follows it usually contains a noun phrase that refers to the super topic of the text. So that makes it pretty easy to identify. I suppose it's like giving the title of the text, but at the end. So it's an example. So it's like this, the disease cholera. And here's another one that I don't have the recording here for. So here we've got a third person singular pronoun referring back to that text. So it is the advantages of life lived in the bush. So shana tuach nza manza dame. Okay, so just to sum up, we saw that Buwal and Gavar have much in common in terms of the primary linguistic devices used to signal topicality in these languages, such as the presentative construction and the preposed noun phrase, titles, that kind of thing. We saw there's some similarities and differences in how super topics and basic level topics are handled. And so primary devices can be divided into those used for unidentifiable and identifiable topics. And we saw primary devices can be accompanied by a number of secondary devices that may have other functions such as connectors and the expression whole grade, UC, all this kind of thing. So some of these secondary devices can are more used in a more general sense to mark boundaries or developments within a text. And sometimes you can have no formal introduction. So perhaps there are some entities that are less topical than others. Could explain that. So again, with topic maintenance, we have to try and separate out this continuity, discontinuity, and topicality. That's a challenge. Yeah, so minimal encoding used for discourse topics in a discontinuous environment. So that can indicate topicality. We have the preposed definite NPs being used to reintroduce or upgrade non-topical reference to topical status. And yeah, I just mentioned that, yeah, this distal demonstrative, the previous reference marking seems to have a highlighting function. So whether its interaction with topicality perhaps warrants further investigation. Thank you. And that's the picture of the Gavar area. So I have no idea what time it is, but hopefully I haven't gone too long.
I think the timing's completely perfect. So we have just around 15 minutes for questions and discussions on this paper, which has given us a very comprehensive and clearly articulated explanation of the various ways of marking and talking about topic in Buwal and Gavar. Now, if people want to ask questions, you can either switch off your mute and ask them, or put them in the chat. We did get a question halfway through from David Strecker. Are there ways of marking new topic or changing topic? And then soon as this question came up, within a minute or so, you had answered it. So, and David's also observed that zero encoding is found all over the place in the Hmong narratives that he's been working on. And I guess zero encoding is something that we see everywhere. So would anyone like to jump in and ask a question or make a comment or an observation at this point? Because if not, I was just going to ask very briefly one thing about these various markers. James has a question too, but mine would be, how many of these things, how many of these various strategies or methods of marking might you find in places where they are not fulfilling the functions that you've been discussing, so that they actually have multiple functions?
Yes, well, I did mention about connectors, some of those connectors perhaps marking sort of significant developments in the text rather than topics in particular. I suppose the sort of preposing, so the whole preposing strategy is kind of, as I was talking about with talking about topic markers, it's kind of a way of what they call frame setting constructions, marking a point of departure. So in those points of departure, you can have topical reference, but you can also have other things such as adverbials. So, say setting the scene of time or place, that kind of thing. Even subordinate clauses like temporal subordinate clauses, adverbial subordinate clauses can go in that kind of position in the sentence. So in general, I guess sort of that preposing is, more of a point of departure rather than just, a topical thing. But when you've got a noun phrase there, a referent there, then it seems to be a topic, a discourse topic that is going in that spot. Trying to think what other. Yes, and with all pause, actually you get this rising intonation and pause and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, James, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. Lots of information to absorb. I guess mine's the opposite of Stephen's question, because of course you would expect to find a lot of these constructions in non-topic marking functions, because presumably the topic marking function is something that these might have grammaticalized from in the past. My question is sort of the other way around, is I'm as a variationist, I'm kind of interested in choices that speakers are making about which strategy to use under which circumstances. And I think it's interesting, the zero marked form, and I think David in the comments, with something like rain, that's something that you don't really need to topicalize because everyone knows what rain is. And in Cameroon, from my understanding, it's very prevalent. As are caterpillars, I understand as well from other stuff I read. So I'm just curious whether you've sort of thought about looked at the distribution of the forms in any kind of basic quantitative way, in terms of is one form more prevalent in this context and another form is more prevalent in other contexts, or is it just not, are you not able to do that?
Okay, well, I did, in my table, I did try and count the number of examples that I had of each strategy. If I can find that table. For the introductions. Yeah. So you can see that. Yeah, so I did try and at least count the number of examples I had of each type. I guess that doesn't give you the information about it, or say with the no formal introduction why exactly that might be. I mean, we did have the example of rain, like you said, everybody knows what the rain is. I think another example I had in my paper was just if you're talking about people in general, so people do this or that, well, you don't really need to formally introduce that. With the caterpillars, it was introduced with the indefinite determiner because it's talking about a particular kind of caterpillar that was posing the problems. But yeah, so if we look at the numbers in this table, we see that, the most common ones have the indefinite determiner, the preposed noun phrase, presentative construction, as I said, with unidentifiable new topics. It's used with that. Yeah, for those other sort of more minor strategies, I haven't really thought about exactly when it's being used. But as I said, if it's just kind of marking kind of developments or boundaries or something like that, then maybe it has no strict correlation with the kind of topic that's being introduced. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe that's something to look in further.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also interested in it from a typological or cross-linguistic perspective as well, to see what strategies are employed most frequently. The other question I had was something you mentioned, which I'd never really thought of before, which is about the end of a topic. So normally when we talk about topic and focus, or topic and comment, the idea is the topic is something established in discourse already, or it's the subject of the what we're talking about. But I hadn't really seen any discussion about the demotion of topicality. So the idea that this is okay, somehow you're marking that this is not the topic anymore. Is that something that is that what you're saying, that some of these things might function as, to sort of detopicalize something?
Yeah. So, well, as I said, I mean, it's not that common, but of course, well, we had the example in Gavar. I mean, it's basically signaling the end of the text. You're saying, well, okay, I'm going to stop talking about this now. All of that was about this topic at the end. The other one was just, yeah, when you were giving a bit of clarification about a topic, and I only had a couple of examples of that before moving on to the next topic. So yeah, I think that's something that I haven't read much about. So I'm not sure how the languages handle that. Or perhaps it's not a very common thing. People do talk about, intonation going down, that kind of thing, which we can probably observe in some of these texts too. When you get to the end of a section, sort of the intonation's kind of going down, the voice is going lower, and then when you start a new section, the intonation goes up. So that is something that I observed in some of these texts as well. So yeah, I think I have read about that at least. Sorry, I don't have a complete answer on that.
No worries. I just thought it was kind of interesting because I hadn't heard of it before.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. It occurs to me that one way that you can do this in conversation, which somebody quite close to me does quite frequently, would be to say, well, now changing the topic or changing the subject and move it to something else. I guess
just say anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I have read about those kind of strategies, but I suppose here I'm specifically looking at where the topic is actually mentioned. I mean, yeah, of course you get these kind of expressions that will close off, a topic or a section of discourse. I think I was reading, lots of little expressions like that we have in English. So, but where you actually specifically mention the topic, that's pretty rare, I think.
Any other comments or questions that people would like to? We still have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, just on the zero anaphora, David mentioned that, and that's, I've been having discussions with other authors in this project, and there's certainly for languages in other parts of the world, zero anaphora is actually used a lot to mark topicality, whereas it's not so common in these languages. Buwal and Gavar.
Well, if there are no more questions and or comments, I think now is a good time to thank Melanie for this very comprehensive and well presented and clear seminar on a topic which is which can be quite complex. So thank you. We don't have any, I might stop the recording at this point.